Hello, everyone. My name is Ed Howard. I am the Chief Executive Director of the West Oakland Stories Positive Feeling Movement organization. On behalf of the Oakland Black elders and myself, we sincerely appreciate you joining us today. Our mission is to unite people by spreading messages of no negative speak with each other. Together, we aim to uplift and strengthen our community through these values. I'm here with my esteemed guest, Mr. Filix Norris, who has generously agreed to spend time with us today, sharing information about his life. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Ed.
Very good. Also, I want to introduce my associate. He's off camera, Mr. Maurice Powell, who is a young man uh, that keeps me in tune to the younger generations. Maurice, you might want to just say something for a second. I know you're off camera.
Well, thank you for introducing me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Very good. Well, let's get into it. Felix Norris, there's a brother here I've known all of my life. Uh, we were in the same grade in school. We graduated together from high school. We just been knowing each other forever. So uh, why don't we start off your life, starting before you came to California, your family life. What was that before you came to California?
Well, actually, my first introduction to the educational system was in El Paso, Texas. That's where I first went to elementary school, kindergarten, shall we say.
Kindergarten, okay.
At the time, my mother was working at Fort Bliss Military Institution, and we were there because my dad was in the Navy. And when my dad came home, we all moved back to Jefferson, Texas, where I was born.
What's the name of that town?
Jefferson, Texas.
Okay.
It's a small town. It was in East Texas, about 17 miles from Marshall, which was a major metropolitan area in that part of Texas. And I attended school there until I was in the 8th grade. And then I came to California with my family. Well, my family moved to California anyway. And I didn't know it at that time. However, we ended up, once we were in high school, because I was in a different, Prescott was the place where I went to school.
Are you talking about you in California now?
In California, yeah.
Before you get to that part, I want to know more about. Well, let's start it this way. Your parents. I want to talk a little bit about your parents.
Okay.
And their background.
Well, my mom and my father were classmates, and they graduated from high school in 1935. I was born in 37. They were classmates. At the time, I think my dad was 26 when I was born, and my mother was 25. And there began a wonderful relationship. I was always with my grandfather a lot of the time because my dad was in the military. He went into the Navy was drafted. He didn't volunteer. He was drafted into the Navy. And from the time that he went into the Navy, he never came home one time. He was in the Navy for 3 years.
You mean they didn't let him come home?
He was never allowed to have a leave. He never had one. From the time he entered into the military, 3 years, 11 months, and 21 days is how long he was gone. And he told us so much, it's embedded in my mind. 3 years, 11 months, and 21 days that he was in the Navy. He never got one leave. My mother went to New York to see him one time. And the trip from Texas to New York would take 2 weeks. A week to get there and a week to come back. And so in all this time, my dad was assigned to a military transport ship. The name of the ship was the Blue Goose. And he made 21 crossings of the Atlantic Ocean. And on the 22nd time, the ship was sank. So he that was just fortunate that he was able to live. And when he came back to home, well, we lived on a farm, of course. My grandfather owned all of the land. It was a pretty large, self-contained farm. We had our own food. He raised cows. He raised pigs, chickens, and he also raised cotton, none of which I could pick because I was allergic to the sun.
You were allergic to the sun?
I was allergic to the sun.
Wow.
And I know when you look at me, if you look at my pigmentation, you say, how could I be allergic to the sun? Well, what would happen if I was in the sun for an extended period, my temperature would go up. And it wouldn't come down until they got me cooled off. So, and my mom told me when I was very, very young, she said, boy, you're going to have to get an education because you can't do what the rest of the kids do. And that was the thing that propelled me, I guess, on my life's journey, because I was always trying to learn and pick up all the information that I could get. And by my grandfather being a blacksmith, when I was 4 years old, I was working in the shop with him. I would pump his bellows, and I started to learn at that time how to tell the difference in temperatures of metals just by the color.
Wow.
And again, that was the basis for what I ended up doing for the rest of my working years.
How did, if you know, how did your mother and father, how you felt what did they think about the world at that time?
Well, my father he was also a really, they were bright kids, but they both were firstborn. And therefore, that's why they were so late graduating from high school. But they did graduate in the same class. And again, my dad was always saying that I wanted you to be great. That was the words he used. He says, I wanted you to be great. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what he was talking about, really.
Yeah.
But that's what he said. And he was always a hero to me, even though I had that long period of time that I was absent. That whole time he was in the Navy, I never saw him one time. He would write letters to me. As a little boy, he would write letters to me.
Now, you say they both graduated.
They both graduated high school.
Now, we same age, same everything. Was that 8th grade or 12th grade?
12th grade.
So I always heard when I was a kid, I always remember as we all was families coming to California. So when you're in your class, there's always somebody coming in, from different parts of the South. And the kids from Texas, because we were in a school, Prescott, right? Elementary school, junior high school. So we getting kids coming from Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, all the southern states coming to your class all during the year. I always heard and we thought the kids from Texas were smarter. And now you telling me your parents went to the 12th grade.
Yes.
My mother graduated from high school in Louisiana, 8th grade.
Oh no, they went to the 12th grade, and one of the reasons for that was, now I don't know the whole history of the family, but all of the teachers that I was associated with was cousin someone, aunt someone, or uncle someone. And my folk had actually started the first schools. The principal that I went to school to when I initially when it started to, in I think it was in the 8th grade that I went to what the school's name was Central. Professor J.C. Pitts was still the principal of the school, and J.C. Pitts was also the principal of the school when my mother and father graduated.
I heard that same type of story from my parents. Go ahead.
So, and the reason they were so late graduating is they were both two firstborn kids. When my father was about to graduate, my grandfather broke his arm. And my dad had to go back on the ranch and work. And my father and mom had an interesting situation in their education, because my mother, my dad, my uncle, which was my dad's younger brother, and my aunt, who was my mother's second cousin, were all in the same class. But the reason the older kids was there, because they had to work while the young kids went to school in the first place. And so my father and my uncle graduated the same class.
Now I'm getting a picture of almost like you in a small town that look like you guys kind of family running it almost or something.
Well, yes, they were kind of the pillows of the community.
The community, yeah. So you in the top shelf before you come to California.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which made my transition to California a little bit different, because I always thought that I was supposed to be there, and when I got to California, I was a nobody.
Well, let me ask you, what made your parents come to California from such a
well, now, remember I said that my dad was displaced from the family by the United States Navy. That was a hardship for my mother. It was a hardship for my dad.
Oh, okay.
And even though they absolutely wanted to have, I'm one of those kids that was born because they were wanted. My mother used to tell me how she tried to eat properly to make sure that I was going to be healthy.
Yeah.
And at this time when I'm doing this recording today, I'm 87 years old, and mother did her job.
So you come to Oakland, right?
Yes.
What year you come to Oakland?
I came to Oakland in 1952. Yeah.
So that would be we graduating from junior high to
Right,
high
right.
school.
So I was here for all of my high school.
Yeah, right, right. So that's when we
Right.
meet each other.
Right. We
Yeah.
met in high school.
Right, right.
And of course, that's what I'm saying. It was a difficult transition for me. Uh, I just didn't feel that I fit into anything because in Texas I was somebody.
So what? Let's get into that a little bit. What made you not feel you fit
Well,
in California?
California is a metropolitan city. The population of Jefferson, the whole city was about 2,000 people.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so that's a great transition for a kid at my age at the time. I have younger brothers who had no difficulty at all.
Mhm.
They picked it up right away.
Right. 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 Because you already.
But
got set.
I was already set
Yeah.
in my mind kinds of things that I wanted to do and could do. And all of a sudden, this does not exist anymore. However, I was a good student. I didn't have a difficult time in school.
And when you was at Prescott, you was a good student.
Well, you know,
Not Prescott. I'm sorry,
see,
McClimon's.
I was a relatively good student at McClimon's. As a matter of fact, when they placed me in the advanced group of kids, which was supposedly at the time, college prep stuff.
College prep, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but
yeah.
I very quickly fell out of that group. Didn't quite fit, and one of the reasons that I didn't fit was the way I looked at myself, and I was an introvert. And it was a funny thing because I thought Ed was an introvert too for a long time. But he was very quiet. We were
right, exactly.
Yeah. So, and we were classmates from all the way through.
But that's a good point you made. Uh, I don't think I was an introvert, but I was quiet.
Yeah, well, he was quiet.
I was quiet.
And I was quiet.
Right, right. But I'm saying I was quiet thinking I knew everything rather than quiet.
And I was quiet because I knew I didn't know anything. I'd assume I know nothing now.
Well, I guess the difference was
friends. It's friends. It's association.
What I'm trying to say is the difference was that I started school in California.
Right. That's the
so
difference.
I didn't have it. I mean, I was too young. I was only 5 years old when I started in California, so I was only in Louisiana 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember.
And I started at 5 years old in El Paso, Texas.
Yeah, right.
Where there was very few blacks people there. It was mostly all Mexicans or Spanish.
So you had quite a different, that part of our life was quite different.
Right.
In that way.
And it was so different until, believe it or not, every day was a day to try and survive. Because my mom was working at the Fort Bliss, which was the Army base, and we had one aunt who was in charge of all of the kids in the neighborhood, so to speak. And that was me and my brother. I only had one brother at that time. My first cousin, and then we had a couple of more cousins, and we all lived on the same street, which was called, the name of the street was Dallas Street. And we had to physically fight, every day.
Wow. I remember when I came up and was talking to you about your grandfather, and you said he had a white man working for him.
Yes, he did.
But when he went downtown, he had to
Well, the
change.
change was he was Mr. Sam on the properties, and when he left off the property, he was old Sam Norris.
Of course, the Southern tradition.
Right.
Right. Well, I was, when you told me that, me being a Southern boy too, I didn't understand. I didn't believe that a white man could work for a black man and be under his direction and then go to the white side of town or outside of the control of the where he worked, and he could switch up like that.
Well, he had to. See what happened. That was my grandfather and his father. They had a total of 380 acres of land.
Oh, he was connected like that.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's what I say. We were self-sufficient.
Yeah, very safe. Okay, let's get into okay, you're in Oakland. You're sensitive and that kind of thing. You graduate, you get to be coming into your adulthood. How did that transition go from?
Well, that transition went relatively smooth in that we didn't. It was at a time when Jim Crow was a order, rule of order, and so we didn't. They had housing, shall we say, housing was segregated. This was prior to the Byron Rumford 1964 Fair Housing Act. That's when that happened in 64. I graduated high school in 55, and you had to go to special places to rent. So the first thing you would ask when you went to try and find a place to still live, do you rent to black people? That's the question. I mean, you have to ask that question. And usually the answer was no, and you'd have to go somewhere else. It was the same thing in employment. We had primarily more PhDs buried in the postal department. As a matter of fact, Ed and I had a couple of teachers that worked at the post office, and they were substitute teachers because they couldn't get a job. Am I right, Ed?
Oh yeah.
Remember Isom?
Who?
Isom was his name. The guy.
I remember that name.
Yeah, he worked at the post office.
He was in our class.
No, he wasn't in our class. He had a PhD in history, but the only job he could get was a substitute teacher.
I didn't know about him.
Oh, you didn't know Isom.
Yeah.
Well, he did. Well, he would substitute for Miss Matthews, Evelyn Matthews.
Yeah,
I know you know her because that was our homeroom.
Yeah, right.
Well, that
was it. So you transitioned from high school. What do you do? What do you?
Well, I first went to work at a place called National Carpeting. That I got that job while walking, and I didn't even have bus fare. So the next day, the guy who hired me, he says, "Well, we have a man here who drives in every morning. Maybe you can get a ride with him." I forget his real name, but everybody called him Ace. So I rode to work with Ace for a week, and then I finally got a couple of dollars. And as a matter of fact, I got enough money to buy my own car.
What year you bought your first car?
I bought my first car in 1956.
My same. No, I bought my first one in 55.
Yeah, I bought my first car in 56. Never will forget it. It was called a Hudson Hornet.
Oh, one of those? That's a low rider.
That's right. You step down into it.
Right.
But, it didn't last very long. And next thing I knew, I got another car, and I got a 51 Mercury.
Mm.
And that's what I had when I went in service. But now the thing that when I really started to, I guess, develop was in the military.
Mm.
I started to merit, and at the time they was telling us, everybody, if you want to go to school, go down and get a deferment from the draft board. Well, I did. I was following all the rules all the time, but I didn't stay in school very long because I just wasn't happy not being able to help my mother. So what I did was I dropped out of school. But mind you, I had already applied for a student deferment, which put me fair game for the draft board. I drops out and I get drafted. Well, I didn't want to go to the Army, neither did I want to go to the Navy, because my father had already told me, whatever you do, son, don't go to the Navy.
Okay.
And that was because he said they're going to make a steward out of you. That means you're going to be a cook, whatever, making beds. That's all you're going to get.
And
to
as
do.
high as you're gonna go, right?
Well, you can get good a lot of get good rank out of it. My dad made first class right away, but he still didn't want me to have that kind of a life. So I said, okay, I'm going to join the Air Force. I had to go, and when I went down to talk to the Air Force, they told me, well, you've already been selected by the draft board, so we can't let you in here. I said, what can I do? I said, well, I'm not supposed to tell you this. He said, but you can go to Los Angeles, or you can go to Fresno, because those are different draft boards. At the time, California had three designated draft boards. One was the Northern, one was Central, and one was Southern. So I went down to the Central, drove my car down, did the testing to see if I could qualify to get into the Air Force, because you had to score a little bit higher to get into the Air Force than you did any of the other branches of service. Well, I was a pretty good student, so I scored high enough to go to the Air Force. And the guy told me, he says, okay, we want to swear you in tomorrow morning. I said, well, I have my car here in Fresno. And how am I going to? He said, that's your problem. So I got in my car, drove back to Oakland, caught a Greyhound bus at 12 o'clock at night, and got back to Fresno. But I was sworn into the Air Force, and that was at the time when they had the Parks Air Force Base, which is in Pleasanton, was the place that they sent me for training. And that was kind of interesting because normally people from California always ended up at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. But because I joined not in my draft group, I was sent back to where I lived for basic training. I was in the very first 4-week basic that the Air Force ever had. And so I was at Parks for 4 weeks. And then they shipped me off to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And that's where I went to the Organizational Supply Tech School, which was an administrative kind of thing. There you had to learn typing and, relatively a lot of math, a lot of direction of how materials are handled, how they're stored. Actually, the best way I can describe that is the Air Force adopted the same storage facility or system that Susan Roebuck was using. And not only was it the Air Force that used that, they eventually, the whole U.S. government, that's what they used.
Okay.
So that was kind of lucky in the sense that that's what I was trained in. And from there, when I graduated from there, my first duty station was another place that I absolutely did not want to go. Didn't even know where it was. I was assigned to Orleans Air Force Base, Paris, France.
Paris, France?
I'll show you
Paris,
the
France.
real Paris, France. I had no idea. Now you got to realize I was just a country kid that had come to California. That was enough of a shock. And then to get sent to Europe, I was 19 years old. And the really ironic part about that is I got shipped over there. It was 80 guys in my class. 78 of them got some other duties that they didn't want. And I was willing to take any one of those. I wanted to trade with everybody. The first sergeant told me, Alvin Norris, you drew Europe, that's where you going. So don't come back to the orderly room anymore asking about trade. Now, the reason I didn't want to go to Europe, because it was a 36-month assignment. And off I went after 30 days of being at home. I went to France. And I wasn't in France very long, because I had played football when I was at Mac, and basketball. So once I got over there, they said, oh, you're an athlete. They sent me to this place called Chaumont and put me on the football team. And when the football season was over, I got another reassignment. I got reassigned to Germany. I had been in the military at that time I'd been in Europe for a total of 6 months. Then they sent me to a place called Pforzheim, Germany, which was a ACNW station. And the only thing that station was to do was what they called DO line. And that is, it was a radar unit just in looking at Russia. That's all they had to do. 24/7, monitor what the Russians are doing.
Okay.
And it was real easy duty, because you could take off and go anywhere you wanted to go. If just have somebody else, if you was on 72 hours, and you get a 72 hours off. If you hook up with 2 people, you got more than 72. You double that. You don't have to. It was really nice. It was super good duty. And I stayed there from the time that I got there. I was there for 30 months. And when it was time to come back to the States, I decided, I don't want to go home now. Why should I go home? But coming home, normally whenever you come back to the States with less than 180 days to do, you don't get reassigned. So I thought I was going to get discharged at the port of entry. Get to the port of entry, they said, nope, you got orders for research and development. Well, I don't get discharged? No, you don't get discharged. You go to your station. So from there, I went to Holloman Air Force Base, which was a research and development. And I got assigned to the test track, which is where they was testing rocket engines for space assignment. My roommate at Holloman was the handler for the first chimpanzee that went into space. And that's kind of the way I got into the university. Because when I came back to after I got discharged on April the 30th.
Well, we talked before about that. You came out and you went up to University of California, Berkeley.
Well,
Got hired almost as a dishwasher, and you end up being an engineer. Tell me that story.
well, I got hired. The reason that I was hired is because CORE, NAACP, and SNCC was all picked in that department because they never had anybody black.
What year was this?
1962.
62. Okay.
They had never had a black man who worked in that department. And so my sister-in-law, I had gotten married by this time, had a couple of kids. My sister-in-law told me, well, Felix, why don't you come up to the university and put in an application? I said, okay, because I had a job, but it was working at Owens, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working what they call rotating shifts. 1 week days, 1 week swing, and 1 week graveyard. Yeah. And you changed every week.
Right.
That was kind of hard on my wife and a new baby that I had. So going and when I got up to Cal, they sent me over to personnel. The guy at personnel, his name was Dave Brown. It's really funny. I remember all this. Dave Brown said, "Oh, I got this job for you, probably. I'm gonna send you over to them right now." Now I'm just walking up here and filling out the application. I didn't know I was gonna get a job the same day.
Mm-hmm.
He sent me over to material. It wasn't called material science at the time. It was called, the name of the department was mineral technology. So they sent me over to mineral technology. And because I had the experience of working at the test track, which there I was issuing parts for engines, and you have to really know all these plumbing parts and the nomenclature, all that stuff. The guy would walk in, what is this? And you had to know what it was. So that's what I was doing. And it was more or less a storekeeper, I got hired at. And say, well, you know how to handle chemicals? I said, yes. I had a warehouse. I had probably enough sulfuric acid to blow up the whole state of New Mexico. Because that's that's one of the primary acids that you use always in recovery. And so they said, well, okay, we're going to put you in the storeroom. I got hired by the chairman of the department. And I didn't really have a boss. He says, well, Professor Doran is your supervisor, but I'm hiring you right now. And if anybody gives you any problems, you have my permission to come directly to me. And that's the way he said it. Come to me with the problem. Now, this is the chairman of the department. I wasn't supposed to stop at his administrative assistant or do anything. Come see him if I had a problem. Well, I never had a problem.
What do you think made him give you that special kind of attention?
Because I was 6'4" and black. That was the reason. Pure and simple. They were tired of people picking on them. And I fit to see at least my qualification, what I'd been doing I spent 3 years in Europe. Black, I had been interacting with all people of all races. I wasn't afraid anymore. I no longer had these inhibitions that had been part of my life at the beginning when I first came to California. So I guess you can say I was malleable. I knew how to handle myself.
Okay.
And I never had a supervisor the whole time I was at Cal until the later years when I started working in machine shops and stuff like that. But for those first 5 years, I was my own self-boss. All I had to do was show up on time. Well, I was a disciplined person. I never received an Article 15, which would be a demerit. Never got an Article 15 that I went the whole time I was in service. I was airman of the month for about 4 months. And the reason that I got out is because I was in a career field that I couldn't make any rank. So I said I had to get out of here. This was just before because Kennedy was the president at that time. No, he wasn't. He wasn't president then. But it was before the Bay of Pigs. And when that happened, I had just started to work at the university. But the reason they gave me that job was because I had the experience of working with chemicals and things.
Okay.
Which basically, I think I told Ed, it was just a dishwashing job. All they wanted me to do was sit behind the door. I'd order the stuff, and I'd issue it out to the students when they come up, whatever it was. And I knew I was good in chemistry. I knew how not to mix chemicals. And because there are different classes of chemicals. And if you start mixing them, just the mere fact that you put them in the same physical location, you can cause a problem. Because if the caps are not tight, they will migrate to each other. Once they get together, you got a problem. So I knew how not to mix the chemicals. Okay. And then I started looking at all this stuff. I said, hey, I can do this stuff myself. Well, I knew that I didn't take the advanced algebra and stuff in high school because I was able to convince my mother, I don't want to take that. It's too hard. But I realized that I need to know this now. So when I would go to work every day, I always had to take my lunch because all the little money that we had, we needed to buy diapers and things. So I had to take my lunch from home. What I would do is I would go to the engineering library. They had microfiche machines in there.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And so I started to brushing up on my math on self-programmed machines. That's how I did it. Now, and then from that, it was every time I would see what was going on, and then I started to do in the labs. And every year, the lab class would have 12 different experiments that they had to do. I got to the point that I'm setting these experiments up. So in the process of setting them up, I learned as much as the engineers did. And I did that for a lot of years. And that is how I ended up. I wanted to finish up my degree. I did get an associate in electronics, but I never was able to finish up the bachelor because every time I was nearing completion, my mother would need something, something would happen, whatever happened. The last thing, I was at St. Mary's and I was a senior. And they say, well, why are you doing this? I said, well, that's what I have to do to get the degree. He says, why don't they just give you the degree? I said, no, not at Cal. They would not give you anything. You have to go ahead and finish it all up. Well, I never did finish. But 4 years before I left Cal, there was a development engineer's position opened up. I didn't even want to apply for it, to be frank and honest with you. And I didn't apply until the last week. And that was at the urging of one of the administrative assistant, or MSO at that time. They no longer use the term administrative assistant. They was MSOs. And she says, Felix, why haven't you applied for the position? I said, well, I don't know if they're going to give it to me anyway. She says, apply for the position. just like that.
She's letting you know, right?
Yeah, well, she says, apply for the position. So when I did, and when I applied for the position, I was interviewed and talked to the faculty, and then the chairman of the department at that time was a student that I had known. Now he'd come to Cal as a graduate student, got his PhD, had gotten the president's medal of one of the smartest scientists in America. And you don't have many of those. His name was Ron Gronsky. And Ron Gronsky told me, he says, Felix, why did it take you so long to? I said, well, Ron, he says, I know, you don't have to tell me. He said, you know more engineering than most of these graduate students. He says, and you're probably the only person that's going to be able to handle this faculty and the shops at the same time. I had 27 PhDs, 27 professors, plus their assistants that I've always had to do. So actually, it's more or less like being a babysitter on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have to know what you are saying no to. And then probably the one time that really caused me to retire, what I did was opportunity, and it was a smart thing to do because we was going to redo a retrofit on the building. I had put all the tools together, made the schedules on when we had to move, when the people had to move, all that. I managed to do that. And we had to moved the teaching labs to a new building. And the new building had everything except a dedicated fume hood raceway. The dean of the College of Engineering said, well, maybe you guys can just drop that experiment. I said, well, the college would have to determine whether we're going to drop that experiment. He says, well, look, we just don't have the money for you to put that raceway in. Went back, and Dave Brown, by this time, he's also in the College of Engineering because he followed me there. And Dave said, well, Dean said, we just don't have the money. I said, well, Dave, if they don't have the money, then they just can't teach the class. He says, well, no. He went to talk to the dean. Dean said, we don't have the money. I said, well, Dave, I am not going to sign off on this. Can you imagine me telling the dean of the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley, I will not sign off on them putting a class into a room? Well, my reason for doing that was if I knew that we was going to use perchloric acid in this one experiment. Perchloric acid is one of those acids that you can't have in contact with nothing else because you'll create something called perchlorates. And if it's steel, anything other than 316 steel, these perchlorates will adhere to this raceway. And then when something else goes down, you don't know what it is, next thing you know, you got bang. So I told the dean, no, we can't do that. Because as the development engineer in the department, I'll have to sign off on it. And I said, I won't sign it. I'm not signing that. Well, dean comes back, you got the money. but I was still apprehensive after that. I said, oh, they're gonna throw my ass out of here.
You know, you've had so many positive circumstances
Yes.
in your life. How do you think that come about?
I finally come to the realization that my acceptance of how I saw it now is that it was divine intervention, because the things that happen are just not supposed to go that way. But I was doing the best I could do all the time, and God was in the plan. That's all. That's the way I see it.
Well, let me ask you this way. You say God was in the plan, but you were doing what you did,
Yes.
right? So I give all the, what I want to say, I give all the, uh, give me a word here.
Well,
I want
I
to
was
give you
prepared.
all the credit.
Yeah, I know, but I was always prepared because I'm one of those individuals who, no matter what is going on, the same way I got into photography. My mother was a good photographer,
Mm-hmm.
and I was, by the way, I was also in charge of the photo labs at Berkeley.
Oh, you?
In the X-ray labs, I was, well, I tell you, I did everything.
Good.
I ran the very first scanning electron microscope that they ever had in the department
Of UC Berkeley.
at UC Berkeley.
Yeah.
But it was out of, I was always inquisitive. I was an inquisitive kid. My first bicycle, I made it myself. I got parts from the junkyard and built my first bicycle. So all of my life I've been able to translate from my brain to my hands.
Well, I'm relating so much to you about what you're saying because everything you said, I did it the same way. My first bicycle, I was just inquisitive.
That's
I
right.
tore it apart. Well, what happened was my younger sister, not my younger sister, the first sister under me, was born. Now I'm 8 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm getting my first bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time when we all, well, you wasn't here yet, but we all started to, they started the police league in Oakland to play
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
baseball, and
Yeah.
Frank Robinson and all these guys, Beta Pinson, all of us was together. But I got the babysitting now because my sister's born. I get my bicycle. My mother's going shopping. She be gone most of the day. I'm bored. I take my bicycle, I tear it down. Spokes, chain, all of those things, put it back together. That's how I started in the mechanical kind of thing. It was just out of boredom. I
Right.
wanted something to do, and I did that the rest of my life, things like that.
I had a Southern Pacific train machinist,
Yeah.
and that was a 4-year job. That apprenticeship ran for 4 years.
Okay.
I didn't go through that type of training, but I worked in the machine shop, and I could build anything just like everybody else could.
Okay.
By the time I got out of there, and I had to go down to Laney to learn that stuff at night.
Okay.
but Johnny Walsh was an age, and I was one day we was going to restring a bicycle. He says, Felix, you can't restring that bicycle, that wheel. I said, sure I can. He said, that's more than an ocean. Okay. All it is to repeat the pattern. Every third hole, you repeat the pattern again. I put all those spokes in, one behind the other.
Yeah.
And when you get through, now you got a problem because you got you got spokes in every place. But they have to the distance has to be the same all over. Now how you gonna do that? That's why he was telling me I couldn't string it. I say, but I know how. I'm gonna string it. And I did. I strung that thing and I didn't use no instruments or nothing. All I used was my screwdriver and my ear. Because once you got that spoke as tight as it needs to be, you just go ding, ding. It's just like a tuning fork.
Okay.
That's the way I did it.
You knew when it was right. Yeah.
And I knew when it was right, and it didn't wobble either.
Right. That's amazing, man.
And Johnny he was a excellent machinist. I mean, he was excellent because he was the superintendent of the whole shop.
Mm.
But now once I became the department engineer,
Mm.
the shop was under my supervision because
Okay.
I was the engineer for the whole department.
Okay.
So I leapfrogged over my boss.
Mm.
And you know something, Ed?
Mm.
I never had any problem with anybody. And Ron told me I wasn't going to have any problems.
Okay.
He said, because they know you knew how to do everything.
Right. Right.
I even had, the only real problem I had once was with an ex-chairman. And he wanted to have some work done in the shop. We had an operating procedure in the shops was classroom stuff comes first. No matter what your project is or what you're working on, we have to have things done for the classes because the state is paying for the kids to go to class. Now, anything else, if you just research, do it. Well, he had a project that he needed to have some special stuff done in the shop, and he went to the superintendent of the shop and said, I got to have this. And they sort of had some words, and the superintendent called me and he says, "Look, Jim came down here and he want to give the guys a bad time." I said, "Well, Jim knows that's wrong. He's not supposed to come to you. Period." So now I got to go and talk to an ex-chairman. This is before I deal with the dean. This is dealing with the ex-chairman. And he said, "Well, I just got that." I said, "Well, look, Jim, because I've gotten enough kahunas or balls or what else by the end to say everybody's first name. I didn't say Professor Evans or nothing. That was his name. I said, look, Jim, you have a contract with the government and you have to get this work done. However, you can't go into the shop and tell the guys to drop what they're doing if it's for classroom stuff." I said, "Well, I got to have it." I said, "Well, we got extra space in the shop. Why don't you hire your own machinist? We'll make space for him to work in the shop. That way he's working for you in your project. And when he doesn't have anything to do, then the superintendent in the shop will use him to help us keep up with all of the other stuff." He says, "Well, yeah, I could do that." But he hadn't thought of it.
Right. Right.
He just
You did. Yeah.
Well, I'm always, covering my butt trying to. You got a lot of things to do, and you got to be quick to do it. You can't stand around because nobody's gonna help you.
Mm.
Jim hired a machinist. He put his machinist down there. Everything worked out. And so it worked so good until when I retired. I was sitting in my office in there one night after I'd been off the campus I think I'd been off the campus 6 weeks. But when I worked for the university, I wasn't covered by Social Security. But I was covered by Social Security.
How did you not covered by Social Security?
Because I made the choice that I didn't want to be covered by Social Security because I knew how many units you have to qualify at my age. I knew that to qualify for Social Security at my age, because Social Security Roosevelt put it into effect in 1937. Okay?
Yeah, I remember that.
Anybody that's born before 37 or 37 only have to have 40 quarters in order to qualify. Well, I had worked at this Owens, Illinois, and cotton mill, and I did 4 years in the military. But 4 years in the military was damn near already enough, because you get that's 4 times 4. That's 16 quarters right there.
Okay.
So I knew I didn't need much to qualify. And so when Johnson passed the law that the university had to come under Social Security, and the reason they did that was because of Medi-Cal. And so you notice everybody in the country had to come under Medi-Cal, except politicians, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. They
At,
get
but
their
at
own
seven,
thing.
at 70, everybody goes under Medicare.
Mm,
That's why that's the only way they can put the program into effect.
mm,
So I was already vested in the university retirement
mm.
when that happened, and they came to me and say, "Well, you know, if you will allow us to put you," I said, "I don't want nothing to do with Social Security," but I already knew what the rules was too.
Well, yeah.
So,
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
and so what happened is when I retired, I wasn't going to be able to collect it in Social Security, but I knew at 70 I was going to go into Medicare anyway, and I did. The university was going to have to pay it though. And you know the money that they take out of your
Oh, yeah.
out of
Oh,
your
yeah.
check to pay for Medicare.
Yeah.
I don't pay that.
Mm.
The university pays it because I chose to stay in the university program. Then I qualified myself, and here's what Social Security does to you. And my daughter told me if I go ahead and get an attorney, I could probably get all my money back because once I qualified myself when I got to be 70, I'm covered. Medicare is getting paid twice for me. They tell me they're not, but that's a lie because the university still pays it, and then they take it out of my little check that I'm supposed to be getting too.
Right.
See,
You learn tricks of the game.
but I told my daughter, I said, no, I don't. It's not worth it. I'm not going to complain
You
about it.
retired.
I said, I'm retired, but I'm paying Medicare twice as much as a lot of people
Okay.
because the university still pays it. I can see it on my check stub because they have to pay it. And then they're taking it out of my money also because I got myself qualified because I had a little job, a little business of my own. And what I did was pay both parts of the Social Security for a year. And then at that point, I quit.
Let me ask you this. We're both elders now, right?
Yes.
How do you feel about being an elder?
I'm very pleased and happy. I sometimes wonder why as you notice, I live alone. And that's because I lost my wife. She passed away. We've been married 27 years. And she passed away, and then I met this other lady. And we hung out together for 15 years. And then she passed away. So
Wow.
but I never married again.
Okay. Okay.
So that part, I said, now I'm too old to do anything with without having a mate. But I keep running into these younger folks who says, "Oh well, I know I'm not going to commit myself to this because I know better."
You're old enough to know better.
Because number one, it actually turns out that how you going to talk to these people sometimes,
Okay.
and it just doesn't work that way. I know because I've met some people that's the same age as my oldest son, and I already know he's nuts. So I already figured, well, you're going to be nuts too. As soon as we start talking, well, this ain't, you can't. I said, well, hold it. Don't say that, what they can't do, because they can do whatever they choose to do. And you have to be able to adapt to what they're going to do. I'm sure that this happens to him. We've lived long enough and seen enough stuff in this society. We know what they're getting ready to do before they do it.
That's what elders are. That's wisdom.
Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, it's wisdom and experience.
My son, just this past week, he had an accident. And he told me what happened. I said, well, I never drive in that lane. And then he said, well, Dad, I'm trying to tell you what happened, and you gonna make me feel bad like I was doing. I said, no, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, son. I'm just saying that to me, all of my life, that number one lane was a passing lane. So if I'm not passing somebody, I'm not going to be in that lane. And the reason is when I drive this way. Boom, boom, boom. I'm looking all the time.
Yeah.
I never turn my head when I'm talking.
Mhm.
And if I'm trying to tell him, and all he don't want to hear, so I just had to just shut up. And he was telling me what the number one lane was. And I said, no. Which lane was you in? Well, I was in the outside lane. I said, well, that wasn't the number one lane. Yes, it was. The highway patrolman told me that was the number one lane. Mm-hmm. I said, well, if the highway patrolman told you that's the number one lane, then the highway patrolman is wrong. And then now we really had a discussion. So much so until I had to go and come home because I know better than that. I had to come home and look on my computer and look at the diagrams. I said, now, maybe when I see him, I'm going to say, now, this is the number one lane. And if you was in the lane you say you was in and got hit, that wasn't the number one lane. That was what it. Now, again, this goes all the way back to my training in the Air Force also. Yeah. When all warehouses are laid out that way, even to today, because they got bins, right? They got rows and they got bins. And whether it's in a computer or whatever it is, the one closest to the opposite direction is always going to be one. And the reason for that is if you want to have additional rows, you just add it on. So if you got 3 and you want to have 4, you add 4 to the outside. That's so simple. Well, my son said, well, he wasn't in that lane. I said, oh. And they said you was in lane 1? Yeah. I said, well. And then he started again. I said, that's okay. That's okay. Okay. But I haven't seen him since then. And I went online and I have it on my computer right now. Mm-hmm. And next time when I see him, I'm going to say, now here's the deal. If this is the lane that you was in, because he has a temper. And I don't try to make him, I don't antagonize him. But I know he don't know what he's talking about sometimes. Yeah.
What are you doing now?
Huh? He's a longshoreman. Mm-hmm. He makes so much money he doesn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. Yep. Oh, well, this thing's not operating today. It's crazy again. Talking about groceries or something. But anyway, there's a diagram I have on my phone. Okay. That I'm going to show him exactly what the number one lane is and make sure we're saying the same thing. Because the number one lane is you got cars going in 2 different directions. Yeah. Some going that way and some going north and south. If the car that's going south or north or whatever it is in the one closest to the center of the freeway, that's the number one lane. Because you got 2 number one lanes. You got one going north and one going south, right? And that's the lane. That's the way the lanes are numbered. Yeah. Just like a warehouse, just like anything else. And maybe that's what he was saying. I don't know, but I have to have the picture. It's like you can graft anything that you want to graft. Okay. You know that. I know that. You can do any angle. You make a 90-degree box, and you can tell any angle that's going up there. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean you don't have to know the formula at all. Mm-hmm. That's the answer. You can wherever that line intersects, that's the angle. Okay. But I learned all this stuff from going to.
Let me do this with my assistant, Mr. Powell. You have any comments or questions?
Actually, I was hoping the 2 of you could answer a question from the beginning of the conversation for me. You walked right up to it, and then the subject changed a little, and I was wondering how did the 2 of you become friends when you were in school if you were both so quiet?
Well, you answered first. Then
actually, what happened is we had that were other. See, we were a close knit group of guys, even though I was very introverted. I didn't realize Ed was not, but I thought I didn't know anything, and Ed was. But I don't know. It's hard to say. It really is. But I knew Ed very well. There was another guy that we saw in the same place. Remember Alvin Bizzle?
Oh yeah, yeah. I stayed next door
Yeah, that's
to
what I'm saying.
Alvin Bizzle in Harper Homes.
Well, guess where I ran into Bizzle once? In Stuttgart, Germany.
I didn't even know Alvin was in the service.
Yeah, Stuttgart. Alvin went in. He was in the army. Alvin and Jerry Reddick.
Okay.
And one night we was all up in Heidelberg, in Germany. And I walked up. I said, "God damn, Alvin."
That's a good question. On my end, way I saw Felix was he just stood out. I mean,
That's what everybody tells me now.
he just stood out, you know.
And
I had no idea he was an introvert. I mean, I didn't see that as a teenager.
But if you notice, I never had anything to say a lot, and I was always about business.
But I didn't either.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I knew your brother Ernest. I thought Ernest was a Sun Rose and Satin Ernie. He was the cleanest
Everybody
guy
thought my
at
older
school.
brother was that way.
I mean, this guy was immaculate all the time.
And he was one of the young leaders
Right.
at that time.
He was.
Always, he influenced. My older brother had a big influence on
Oh
me.
God.
Just in the terms
Well, he had
of
one on me too.
being around him.
I wanted to be like him.
A lot of people tell me that all the time about my brother. He's no longer with us now.
I know.
Yeah.
But him, and then there was another guy that I was in the algebra class with. And I don't know what happened to him.
What was his name?
Benny Smith.
Oh, I know him. Benny and his sister Annie.
Yeah, but
Benny, they was in the same class, but they weren't twins.
Right. Well, Benny just disappeared because I don't know what happened to him.
Well, I never saw him since we left high school.
Well, I saw him because I worked at the Naval Supply with him, and then one day we didn't see him no more. And I don't know. I still, till this day, don't know what happened.
I saw his Annie when I had my nightclub. She came by in the 70s, but I never saw Benny since we left high school.
Well, this was in 1961. Last time I saw him.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen it. I just never knew what happened.
And it's just like he was there, and then somebody said something happened, and I don't know if he just came up missing.
Well, in our time, there was a bunch of people that I just never saw them after we got out of high school.
Yeah.
Because when you're in school, you see everybody every day, most of your life. And then when you graduate, people take their life journeys.
Yeah.
And this happens. Marriage, kids, move to another town. That's just life, I think.
Yeah, that's because I think I seen Tony one time.
Tony
Smith. He was in our class, yeah.
Tony Smith. I don't remember that name.
Yeah. Well, he was in our
I remember
class.
Tony Bush.
Well, let me get. He was in the GAA group, I guess.
That's Tony Bush.
Is that Tony Bush?
Kind of dark brown skin
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
Lived down in Bayview Village.
Yeah, okay.
It's Tony. I know Tony very well.
Well, he moved back to Texas.
He moved back with his father to Texas.
And I ain't seen him.
His mother and my mother were good friends because we both lived in Bayview Village. You remember where Bayview Village was?
Yeah.
By Reminding Park.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Tony very well. And he would come back and forth after he went back to Texas for a few years, and then I haven't seen him in maybe 50 years now.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, no, and I saw Huey Roundtree.
Yeah, I was his best friend.
I know. That's why I'm saying this. Huey and now that was the guy that told me. I saw him when we was down here at the football player had this place right up here on, what was his name? Anyway, Huey was telling me, he says, well, you would never, and you know who you, he said, man, you was one of the smartest guys in the class. He said, you would never was a fuck up. That was just his words.
Okay.
And you know how Huey was. And wow.
Answer your question.
Oh,
Yeah.
No, it was good times. When in retrospect, when I look back at it, I now I said, damn, what was wrong with you? You had it all wrong. And I did. I had it all wrong.
Well, you was just being who you are, man.
Yeah.
You know, I always say, if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
You know, you just didn't know. But you progressed anyway.
Yes.
You know
yes.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well,
Sometimes when you're like that, that holds you back.
well, it didn't hold me back
Introverted,
because
in
I
fact.
always, even though I didn't think I was most acceptable, I always figured I could do anything.
Yeah,
That-
that's what
that-
I'm saying. You had confidence in yourself.
Yes, that's right. Now I did that. I believed I could do anything. So much so until when I was in the Air Force,
Mhm.
I didn't say you this. I had the audacity to think that I could fly jets. I applied to Air Cadets.
That's speaking to, that's the beauty to me of being an elder. You've lived long enough to reflect.
Yeah, no, I actually, when I was in Germany, no, France, I applied to Air Cadets. And the only reason that well, I don't know if I would have made it anyway, because, you know, you have to be really sharp to become an officer. I was an enlisted person. And I said, hell, I don't want to be no enlisted. I want to fly jets. And I had one of the guys, Ammon Second, that was in the barracks with me. His first cousin was one of the first black officers that I ever knew, and he was flying the slot with the Sky Blazers, and that's an acrobatic team, Lieutenant Green. And again, like, there's always so few of us wherever, like in the Air Force, there wasn't very many black people, guys in the Air Force. And to see a black officer, oh shit. And flying on the Sky Blazers, we got to be friends because, you know, the other officers didn't like him. It's just like everything else. Now, with Trump calling Kamala Harris dumb, she's probably eminently the most qualified presidential candidate that America has ever had. With her experience and stuff, shit, Barack didn't have that much experience. And the Bushes didn't have nothing.
Which proves that ain't
But
the qualification.
but the point of it is, this woman has it all, and they've tried to really beat up on her all the time, and I think it's so terrible. But you know, it's not about what you know; it's who you know.
No.
And if you got the wrong paint job, you really got a problem.
Mm.
Well, I went through. They did all of my dental work for me. Sent my paperwork to 12th Air Force headquarters. I did the first battery of testing. I passed. And then when the stuff was coming back from Ramstein, which is 12th Air Force headquarters, came back to my unit. Morning report clerk got it. stuck it in the bottom of his desk drawer, and it stayed there for 18 months. And they probably never would have found it if he hadn't went off and screwed up. He went to Switzerland and got drunk. And then they found all that, and they sent me all the paperwork. By this time, all I wanted to do is get the hell out of the Air Force.
Okay.
So I don't know if I could have been a pilot or not, but they didn't give me a chance to flunk or fail. What they did was pigeonhole my, because he had asked me before I left France. Because I don't know if it came back before I left or not. He says, what make you think you can be a pilot? He said, all the pilots are officers. I said, well, I don't know about being an officer, but I think I could fly one of these planes. And we had this Colonel Lincoln was my CO. And he says, well, Airman, he said, well, I'm going to take you up, because I was in a fighter base. We had 3 fighter squadrons on this base I was on in France. And I went up in a T-33. That's sitting behind the pilot. And Lincoln was a big guy. He's a big old raw-boned and white boy. But he was 6'4", same like I was. And when he put that damn little T-33 on, it's like he's wearing this on gun. Because you get in there, and your head's all up to get the top, and you got all this gear on. And I went up in a T-33.
Wow. Did you have anything else too?
Off the top of my head, I kind of wanted to circle back. You mentioned Kamala Harris and her being very qualified.
Oh, yes.
And earlier you mentioned PhDs who had to work at the post office.
Right.
Do you see any
correlation between that?
Right.
Yes. The correlation between that is we always had to be twice as good to be able to be accepted, whatever it was.
So true.
Okay, so
So
there's
true.
so we mentioned earlier, like your experience as elders, you lived in.
And we know that you have to be twice as good to even get an opportunity to prove that you can do the job. And I never knew that when I was, as I was coming along. I just said, well, I can do it, and I work like hell to try and get an opportunity to do it.
Well, let me put it my way. Being a black person, I'm talking to people who are not black, African American. We're in a system. I call it the slave system, really. The way we have to see things and the way other people see things are quite different. The slave system is based on holding black people down, period. Everyone else just comes in with their own culture, with their own way. That's why they can do better. They don't know that. You understand what I'm saying? They never think about it. It's a thing that no one thinks about. It's a system that you're dealing with. It ain't black or white. It's just a system. And it is developed off of the slave system in America.
Yeah. And
so we always have to qualify twice, 3 times, 4 times, because the mindset of everybody is based on the slave system. You're not qualified just when you look at the skin color.
Yeah, that's
psychological. That's something that's embedded in you. You don't feel it. You don't think about it.
And Ed obviously,
but you operate that way.
And see, the other thing is Ed's brother was very positive. So that was whether he wanted to emulate his brother or not, that means that their family had this. And that's what I had, and I didn't really realize it, is that my folk have never thought that they were less than. Never. Not my mother, not my father. My mother actually tutored kids in algebra.
And that's back in the 30s, huh?
She helped kids after we come to California. I brought friends by,
Oh, yeah.
and my mother would help them with their, and then she says, and you can't do it. I said, no, mother. But it ran over the top of me in the end,
Yeah.
and I had to go and learn how to do it. But I really realized that mathematics, and that's what's wrong. If you get the wrong kind of teacher, it's a problem, because there is no right way or wrong way to get the concept. That's what I finally figured out. But you can't explain it to someone else unless you both have a concept that you're talking about. There's no way I can talk to you about stress and strain and all that stuff unless we can. If you want to see it, we have to put the equation up on the board and you look at that. But I know if a load is under compression, or whether it's under compression or whether it's in strain, that's just my eyes. I know that right away, but I can't explain it to you unless we do it mathematically.
Right, right.
Am I right, Ed?
Well, you taking it to real deep areas that I relate to as being black people.
Mm-hmm.
I think all races, although we all human, but we all different too, and we have certain.
We all learn different, also.
That's what I'm saying, because we generally are the same, but individually different. We learn different. We see things different. That has to be taken in contention when you're teaching people.
Right.
Because I've been a teacher too. I've been
Mm-hmm.
all these things.
Well, I was in that teaching lab, and
yeah.
that many times my people are a lot of kids, because my son he hung out at Cal a lot, and he used to come. Well, now after we've been grown up and stuff, he's telling me how, oh yeah, they would say professor, and I say Professor Norris, ain't no damn professor. He said, yeah, but you knew more, and I did. I could explain to students sometimes better than the TA could.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem was I wasn't supposed to. And most of the time I just said, no, I don't know. But the kids knew.
Well, you can relate. That one word would be relate. When I talk for Kaiser engineers, design, industrial design, drafting,
Mm-hmm.
I told them, here's the book. Technically, all the technical information is in the book. But the key is you getting yourself together so that you study it. You do it over and over, you'll get it.
Repetition is a
So
thing.
it's
Do the
just a
work.
matter of you being able to motivate a person to get where they're going.
Right.
With children especially. And they can do it.
Yep, that's right.
Anyway, we're going to kind of cut this off now because this is really rolling today. I love it. Let me close out by just kind of giving to the audience what we're really about here at West Oakland Stories, Positive Feeling Movement. Our goal is to create the environment of community bonding. That's what these interviews is really about. It's more than just an interview and the elders giving out information. We're trying to create a bonding source through us, showing how we actually lived and our experiences. And we want this to connect to the younger generations through what we're calling our oral tradition.
Yeah, we.
So I think we'll just until next time. Please tune in.